Okay, so good evening, everyone. My name is Amy Skillman, and I am director of the MA in Cultural Sustainability at Goucher College. And I want to welcome you to the third of 5 webinars that we have planned for our Spring Chat Fest series. So first, I want to start with a couple of reminders. Closed captioning is available if you need it, if you would like it. It's just click at the bottom of your screen. There should be a CC button that should give you closed captioning. We are recording this, so if you don't want to be on screen, just turn off your video. Please keep your microphone on mute so that we can all hear comfortably, and then we'll turn the microphone back on. You can turn your mics on later when we go into a conversation. If a question does come to you during this conversation, please feel free to put it in the chat. And then Taylor Seitzinger or I will be looking for those questions, and we'll make sure that that your questions get answered at the end. So, and we call this series our Chat Fest series specifically because they're really designed as conversations or chats. So, we'll have some opening remarks by Maida Owens, our speaker today, and then we'll open it up for conversation. But if you like, feel free to put something in the chat about who you are and why you're here. And as I said, you can go ahead and put questions in there during the presentation if you like. So tonight's conversation, which focuses on the role of culture in climate migration, is part of a larger series that we're exploring this semester on the future of cultures in general, especially in this age of climate change and exploding digital technologies. And so this is a sneak peek at the 2 more upcoming webinars that we have. You can see one on April 14th and one on April 22nd. That QR code will take you to the page where you can actually register for them if you like. And that way, if you do that tonight, then you'll have them already on your calendar and you won't need to be reminded. And I think Taylor will also put the direct link in the chat if you prefer to do it that way. So if you did miss one of our previous online conversations, you can access those recordings on our YouTube channel, which is Cultural Sustainability at Goucher, as you can see here. Again, another dragon-infested QR code that will take you to our YouTube page. And the recordings there are organized by semester, and they're sort of thematic, but they're playlists by semester. So you can find the playlist for the fall. You can find the playlist for last spring if you would like. But it's a way to look at all of our recordings. So all of our programs are sponsored by the MA in Cultural Sustainability at Goucher College. Many of these webinars align with courses that we offer our students, and in fact, they involve either an author that the students are reading or perhaps a guest speaker specifically for that class. And tonight's conversation with Maida Owens aligns with our course on culture and calamity that is taught by Tom Walker, who I'll introduce to you in a few minutes. But here again is a QR code link that will take you to our the homepage for the MA in Cultural Sustainability in case you're interested in learning more about our graduate program. And I've also included Taylor's email address and my email address. Taylor is our graduate admissions counselor. So she's the person that works with students who might be interested in our program. So you can reach out to her if you have admissions questions, and you can reach out to me if you have program questions. But both of us are willing and able and interested in talking to you. So, okay, so tonight's program Climate migration is a reality as our sea levels rise, storms erode coastlines, and floods and droughts wreak havoc on agricultural cycles. This is especially true in Louisiana's Bayou region, but who is paying attention to the human dimension of climate adaptation? What role does culture play in the migration and relocation process within the United States? Tonight, we're excited to have Maida Owens join us to talk about these questions. These are questions that she's been grappling with for several years. Maida is a folklorist doing groundbreaking work in Louisiana. She's a founding member of the Bayou Culture Collaborative, which she'll talk about tonight. It's an initiative of the Louisiana Folklore Society that connects people who are interested in the intersection of traditional culture, arts, and science, especially in the face of Louisiana's land loss. Her focus is on the impact of migration on our cultures in the face of these inevitable disruptions. She has directed the Louisiana Division of the Arts Folklife Program since 1988 and will be retiring later this year. But during that time, she worked with organizations and researchers across the state to identify one of Louisiana's most important assets, their traditional arts and traditional artists. Maida has received numerous awards for her work, which I won't go into, but she was selected as a wetlands warrior, which I love, by the Coastal Wetlands Planning, Protection, and Restoration Act. And in 2015, she received the Benjamin A. Botkin Prize for her lifetime achievement in public folklore from the American Folklore Society. Moderating our conversation today is Tom Walker, an adjunct faculty in our graduate programs. His work focuses on a human dimensions approach to the study of the natural and the built environment. As a folklorist, he's documented maritime culture in the Chesapeake Bay region, as well as in New York Harbor. And as a venture philanthropist, he serves as trustee for the Alex C. Walker Foundation, which funds research, policy, and projects investigating environmental economics in areas of climate change, energy and tax policy, ecosystem services, ecotourism, and sustainability in forests and fisheries. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom, who is going to moderate our discussion tonight. Thank you all for being here. And
Thanks,
I will
Amy.
stop sharing.
Okay, yeah. And I want to, it's my honor to welcome and introduce a little bit more Maida. I've had the pleasure of knowing Maida and working with her a little bit, talking a little bit, learning a little bit about some of the work she's doing in the Gulf states and Louisiana in particular. But as you know, these have broad, broad impacts, some of the things we'll be talking about today. I just wanted to focus a little bit on, Maida's work with the Bayou Cultural Collaborative. I think this is how I first, got involved in some of the work that she's been doing. And I think it's really a novel and groundbreaking approach that has long been needed. And it's a way that has brought folklorists into, I think, greater dialogue and conversation, creating discourses around arts and culture with estuary science, with estuary engineering and policy work. The Bayou Culture Collaborative, I guess, is about 4 or 5 years old. I've been participating in some of the monthly meetings that take place, which provide, I think, a rare and important opportunity for siloed expertise and siloed perspectives from some of these fields that I mentioned, to be able to sort of create dialogue and discourse among each other across, in a field of really different expertise and different points of view, but all sharing some common concerns and vulnerabilities around climate change. I've long thought that the Bayou Culture Collaborative is actually a model for what can and I think would be beneficial for other coastal communities around the country. And I think it's timely. It's important to bring together, I think, different voices that are dealing increasingly with the matter of climate change and migration as one effect, migration to higher and safer ground. Um, a recent Brookings Institution webinar indicated that some 10 to 13 million Americans are at risk in coastal communities. And there's a potential for up to 160 million people to be displaced by, sea level rise and climate change. Migration trends, tend to be, I think the projections are that they will be shifting northward toward cooler climates, but the current data seem to indicate that migration continues to grow into sunshine states, Florida and Texas in particular, despite the climate risks. So I think that's kind of a trend that is concerning and may be reversing at some point. Maida is working really at the heart of that issue, and I would say one of her primary focuses of one of the five, I think it's 5 working groups of the Bayou Cultural Collaborative is about migration and specifically about receiving communities, how communities that are forced to move or choose to move, where they go and how they're received and how they, build new relationships with people elsewhere. Um, I think I'll just stop there. I could say more about some of this. I did want to mention that we are, in fact, in the middle of a class at Goucher on culture and calamity, and we have had a session already on migration. So climate migration, climate refugees, as it's sometimes called. So we're eager to sort of take up the conversation today. And with that, I'll just turn it over to Maida. And when she's finished, we'll have opportunity to discuss some of her presentation and some of the issues that she raises. Maida?
Thank you. Slideshow and get it all ready. Okay. Yeah, I'm really pleased to be here. And it's interesting that y'all asked me to talk about a section of the workshop that I do that I don't typically get asked to talk about. So this is I'm excited to go into this section a little bit more than sometimes I usually do. This is an excerpt of a 3-hour workshop that I've developed. And I developed it because I needed it and I couldn't find anybody to do it. And so I decided, well, maybe I need to be the person who does that. The entire Bayou Culture Collaborative has these guiding questions that motivate us. With climate migration increasing, what should we be doing now? And just as important is what will future generations wish we had done? Because I think people are in the future going to look back and say, what were they thinking or not doing? Now, for me, my motivating question is this. What do we need to be doing now to address the human dimension of planning? The human dimension is larger than culture. That is mental health, it's land use, it's zoning, all the different ways that people are impacted more than the land or the physical environment. And my answer and the Bayou Culture Collaborative's answer is that culture needs to be included in what's called the community resilience conversation. And that's a phrase that I came upon when I first started teaching myself about all this, because even though I've been in state government and at the state arts agency for decades, I had never been involved with the environmental planning community and network. Um, as part of the program. And so I just started going to people and talking to them and finding out, telling them my concerns. And one of them said, "Oh, you've identified a gap in the planning, that culture needs to be included in the community resilience conversation." And so I use this as a way to help people understand how um, uh, difficult it is to get the larger network of environmentalists and researchers and policymakers to get it. But and I, uh, for example, most of the efforts, go into mitigation, stopping climate change. A fraction of that is adaptation, and a fraction of adaptation is the human dimension, and then a fraction of that is, culture. But one way to understand community resilience is that um, has ask. Want you to ask, well, what does that mean to you? And did anybody think of planting mangroves? Because generally, the community resilience conversation is about physically protecting communities from some type of hazard. So in Louisiana, it's a lot about storms and storm surges. And so planting mangroves is a way to slow down the water and not damage the buildings quite as much. So today, what I want to do is go include why culture needs to be included in planning, and then a little bit about migrations issues that are related to culture, and then I'll give a little bit about the BCC. And note that in the resources is a link to information about the Bayou Culture Collaborative, but also a link to a workbook for the entire workshop that we do. And this section starts on about page 13 if you end up deciding to go into that. Now, at this group, I don't need to talk too much about what is culture, but this is a definition of culture that I just love. And a, a bishop at a church in Plaquemines Parish, and that's the mouth of the Mississippi River, that's where it meets the Gulf. He spoke at a conference that we were doing, and he gave this definition that I just love. It's one of the best ones I've ever heard. Is culture is the sum total of creative survival. It's like, totally got it. So why include it? And there are basically two good reasons. And the languaging that I'm giving to you is what I have found the planners, the environmentalists best respond to. They get it when you start talking about this. And most important is that culture provides a sense of well-being and also community connections. And both of those will help people adjust and adapt when they're dealing with disruption. And so what this means, why this is important is because social cohesion is so critical in disruption. And so culture is a source of social cohesion. And people with strong ties to culture and community support report higher life satisfaction. So this is a messaging that planners and environmentalists who aren't already involved in culture respond to the best. Now, so why be concerned about this with migration? And it's because when people move away piecemeal, they're not all going at one time, which is actually relatively rare, the culture and the social infrastructure break down. And so, like in Louisiana, we like to move up the watershed to the next highest ground. And so that does help maintain the culture and the social infrastructure. But the problem is that with our particular hazard, rising sea level, land loss, that means people will have to move multiple times. Note, it depends on your hazard. For example, if you're in a wildfire hazard area, when an area is completely burned down, it's not going to burn next year. It'll probably be 20 years before it will burn. So the dynamics are different there. So everything's it's all about context. So why be proactive about this? Because human history is one of migration. This is nothing new in terms of all the movements that have been around the world for all of human history. But in the past, we didn't necessarily have the strategies or the infrastructure to help people adjust. And the reason you want to be proactive is because there's going to be conflict. I heard one person in a workshop talk about, well, it's not, conflict isn't a given. And I said, I want you to show me one where a whole bunch of people moved into a new area and there wasn't conflict. After Katrina and Baton Rouge, I guarantee you that having so many, 100,000 people move overnight to your city, there's going to be conflict. And that's between both the long-term residents and the newcomers. But there are strategies, there are cultural strategies to help people get to know each other and how to adjust. But during this, it's very important that both the newcomers and the long-term residents pass on their culture with intention. And I emphasis on the intention. Some of it might happen, but if there's something that you really value in your culture and you want to make sure that future generations have it, you're going to need to pass it on with intention, because the odds are that it may not. So let's talk a little bit about the different types of migrations. What's going on now is called means migration. And that is simply that those who can leave do. And who are those? In human history, that is tended to be the young adults and the middle class. They leave first. Now, if you're not just going to let it happen, you have to plan. And that whole conversation has been called managed retreat. And that's where you're helping people make decisions, helping them to move. Sometimes it's as individuals, sometimes it's as groups. But managed retreat is an important term that you need to know if you get into this, because that's what the scholarship, that's the key word in the scholarship. But people hate the phrase. And when I first started this, I thought it was because of the word retreat. That was giving up. It's a military term. But retreat can be strategic. But what I was surprised at was people hated the managed part of this just as much, because they said, well, who's doing the managing? They don't want to be managed. So in the last year or so, even FEMA and the major national organizations have started using community-driven relocation. And the whole idea is that people need agency. They need to, that this is not going to go well if you just tell people what they have to do. And that gets into the fourth one, where forced migration, nobody likes. Nobody's happy about being forced. But the third one, chain migration, if you have gotten involved in immigration and refugee studies, this is very common especially common with this. it's everybody, but that's basically where you follow your family and friends. And for let's say you have a refugee group that comes in, they're plopped down somewhere. Uh, they generally are not part of that decision making, or minimal. And then they start hearing, oh, but you know what, over here, people are thriving, they like it, their cousins there, and so they move. So that's secondary chain migration. And sometimes there's a third, another move with tertiary migration. And this is actually how New Orleans ended up with the largest Catholic Vietnamese community. That people started finding out that New Orleans was welcoming them, and that so many of their relatives were there. So they ended up after like 10 years. And after one of the workshops that I did, one of the indigenous artists in the group said, well, there's another type we've been doing for a long time. And that's what she called retreat and return. And that's where you don't 100% leave at one time, and you go back and until that's not sustainable. And she's done that. She lives on the extreme coast, but she has bought land farther inland, and it's turning into an artist retreat almost. And she goes back and forth. She doesn't stay in one place 12 months out of the year. Another form of this is the boomerangs, the people who come and go, that's a different context. But by the way, that place where she has bought property, the locals are not happy at all that all these artists are moving in. So why do people move? Historically, this was very simple. It was a better livelihood, they had a job offer, or they wanted to be near family. When do people move? This is a little bit more complicated. This is all about personal transitions. People generally, until very recently, do not move due to the climate. That historically people moved when there's some kind of personal transition. Children are starting kindergarten. They're graduating from high school. They can't get up the stairs. The home is not usable anymore. It's just not working for them. That's when people make a decision to move under their own volition. Now, there's a second factor though, and that's about breakdown of the community. And this is actually happening in Louisiana, where communities are actually breaking down. And that's where so many people have moved that they're not services there. How far are you willing to drive to get bread and milk or groceries or get gas? How far away are your children having to go to school? Or do you move closer inland so that they don't have an hour bus ride? And it's interesting, one of the ways you can track this kind of thing is look at the post office. Consolidation of the post offices is absolutely tied to demographic changes. So who's more likely to move? That, like I said earlier, the young adults and the educated and the middle class. But also there's a gender component here, that women tend to be more willing to leave. Men tend to be more tied to the land. Now, of course, there are exceptions, but that's just a general tendency. Now, another about the culture is whether or not your area is sticky. And sticky is a concept that about whether or not people tend to be native-born residents and people who are still living where they were born and grew up tend to be much more resistant to moving. And so if your whole area has a high number of native-born residents, in that area, that is called a sticky state. And Louisiana and Pennsylvania are the top two sticky states in the country. We just don't like to leave, or if we leave, we come back. There's a whole lot of that. People go away, they try it for a little while and come back home. So the opposite end of that is whether or not your state is a magnet, and so have more turnover. And this, people come and go more like easier. And this is by the Pew Research, and it is from 2009. But so this list, this chart may have changed in that amount of time, but the concepts have not. They still apply. Now, more recently, Louisiana and more and more of the other parts of this country are facing new issues related to movement. And that's where climate is definitely having an impact of being a factor. Number one is the cost of flood insurance has gone up so much. And FEMA has redone maps in places that said they never had a flood risk and didn't have to have flood insurance. Now they're saying you need flood insurance. Now flood insurance is available. You can, like I wasn't required it, but I bought it just for peace of mind. But then homeowners is much more serious. Now homeowners insurance, we are in a insurance crisis in the state that so many companies have completely pulled out of the state. And the cost has gone up astronomically. I just got my bill for next year, and it went up by 1/3. So that actually got me wondering what in the world, how long can I stay here with homeowners insurance being that much? Now, some areas don't even have it. There are whole areas of the state where you can't even get homeowners insurance. But I'm farther in. There's also areas where you can't even get a mortgage. So the only people there are the ones that are already there, or the people who are wealthy enough to buy without a mortgage. Now, part of the problem is that the longer you stay, you can get stuck, because for many, the buyout offer is not enough to buy elsewhere. Because the value, and that's one of the things that's being discussed with FEMA, but now the new administration, I don't know where this before that, they were talking about the need to rethink about how you figure out buyout so that people can leave. Other things that are happening is we have municipalities that have saltwater intrusion in their drinking water. And so are you going to stay, you can't drink salt water, so you're going to truck in water forever. Now, all of this, as the community is starting to collapse, part of the problem is the erosion of the tax base. When so many have left, you're basically eroding your tax base. And in Louisiana, this is even worse because we have a very high homestead exemption. So many people, poor people, don't have to pay any property tax. So when you put that on top of trying to go somewhere else, that's a hard decision. Now, Redfin did this survey in 2021, and it was one of the first indications that things are changing with Americans. This is the United States, not just Louisiana. But more and more, they are factoring in natural disasters and extreme temperatures when they're trying to decide whether or not to relocate. Now, I want to talk about migration variables. In my longer workshop, I cover part of the factors that don't relate directly to culture. But today I want to talk a little bit about demographics and the cultural issues. Demographics, you need to look at the state and see if you're increasing or decreasing population or what's predicted. How the density of your population is a factor. If you're urban, suburban, or rural, makes a difference. Rural people tend to want to move to other rural areas, except for the young and educated, they want to go to urban sector areas. But are the rural areas available? Because the difficulty of relocating rural to rural is it's not like there's housing stock readily available in many rural areas, or even land to buy. So even if you could buy the land, is the infrastructure sufficiently developed? For example, can you get water? You have to dig a well, all those kind of questions. And then how many elderly and poor people do you have in your area? Now, concerning cultural issues, one we see in Louisiana is that people like to just move to the next higher ground. That is a cultural thing. Or do they like to move farther away? And that also relates to the stickiness versus the magnet. How many people, how long have they lived there? We do have some people in Louisiana who are 7 generations on the same land. Now, not that many, but they do exist here. Versus people who are, say, in suburbs that come and go. So all of those, so how that relates to the stickiness. Now, will people live in a different environment is a major factor, and some of that goes back to the culture. So when they're so tied to the land and water, if they leave that, they may face food insecurity on top of not being able to buy comparable housing. Now, in Louisiana, you do have people who can actually walk out the back door and lift up a crab net and catch crabs for dinner. That actually does happen. So part of their dilemma in leaving is leaving that kind of food security. Another thing that happens in most of these communities, these really traditional close-knit communities, is that there's a bartering system and a sharing system. It's not necessarily bartering; it's a gifting system, and it, they come home and there's a bushel of cabbage on their porch, and they think they know who gave it to them, but they're not necessarily sure. And so there's this constant giving of food. Now, this can be reestablished, especially if enough people who are part of this go to the same place, but that doesn't necessarily happen quickly. And if you're moving by yourself, then that's especially a problem. Now, lessons learned. Basically, we just started the conversation. We provided a space for people who were concerned about all this to exchange ideas. Can't have a community if you don't. We wanted to create a community, and you can't have a community if you don't even know each other. So part of the Bayou Culture Collaborative strategy has been to help connect people and then learn about the issues. So we have a number of programs that help people understand the issues, identify the players, help people understand who the public agencies, the nonprofits that are involved, but basically be visible. And the main way that we're visible is what we call our gatherings that Thomas referred to. These are monthly online Zoom sessions. They're the third or fourth Fridays, all at noon. The first one, we were concerned about having 20 people show up. 150 registered and 90 showed up. And we started with a list of about 50 people, and now we have 1,100 people. It's free. Anybody can come in. The first hour is recorded. They're all on our YouTube channel. But the most dynamic conversations are afterwards, so it is worth attending in person. This slide is in every one, and this is where we emphasize that we are not telling people what they have to do, providing a space for people to exchange ideas. So we do not have all the answers, and we don't support any one adaptation or management strategy. We may feature them on and share about it, but we're not promoting it. And then always about what I previously shared with you about why include culture and planning, just to reinforce that every month. This is our next one, Friday, April 25th at noon. Christine Verdun is the director of a French immersion school. And she's going to talk about how language is so important in maintaining culture. We always try to, we try not to just make this a, some aspect of folklore anthropology, Louisiana cultures. We always ask them to tie it back to, disruption and, why is this important? So that's basically it. You can sign up for our emails. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And I'm here for questions. Oh, I should have stopped sharing. Okay, here we are.
Great, thank you, Maida. We have another 15 minutes here for questions. So if anyone has something they'd like to bring up or discuss amongst the group or for Maida to address, we can do that right now. If Amy is here, can you tell me how I might see that? Questions in the chat?
Well, I didn't see any questions in the chat, but Nancy has her hand up. And then Haseen has her hand up.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Well, Maida, as always, I always come away with so many wonderful things that you're able to do. And I guess I'm just petrified that all of this wonderful infrastructure and communication is being destroyed in Washington. And I'd like to get your thoughts on how people are coping with probably loss of, federal staff and other important information. The demographic data, I understand, is being wiped, from a lot of websites that deal with climate change. So if you feel comfortable, maybe you could share some of that, but if not, I understand.
Well, Louisiana does have its fair of federal employees and federal programs. So yes, we're absolutely being affected by it. Some good news. One big ethnographic survey of the coast was restored. It was cut, but our congressman delegation convinced them to restore it, and it's in the process of being restored. And interestingly, and this is not fabricated after the fact, that the reason that the BOEM, the Bureau of Oceanic and Energy Management, who controls all, deals with all the oil leases, oil and gas leases, the justification from the get-go was that this needed to be done to understand the impact of oil and gas industry on these communities. So, but it is an ethnographic study and about people moving, documenting it all. So
maybe we need to.
It's been restored.
Help energy extractive industries learn more about the communities where they're working.
Exactly. but yeah, we have our share of angst, just like everybody else. We're waiting to see what happens with the National Endowment for the Arts now that the National Endowment for the Humanities has budget cuts.
Let's see. Haseen, you had your hand up earlier.
Sure,
Did you?
absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Haseen. I'm a Goucher student, freshman, and it's very interesting. And I got so inspired by your informative and insightful session. Thank you so much. I'm a econ student, and we studied an elective class about environmental economics. And now what I'm like trying to get is like, when you mention about these examples and how it's affecting, and we can see like the culture pattern behind it in understanding migration, I feel like it's not that I have a specific question, but I got to know like that this is like we have this similar story around the world. What, for example, let's say Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a type of country that is most of the time under the water. And in the history of Myanmar, we saw like how people, because of the political instabilities, they had to migrate and go to Bangladesh. And then there, the Bangladesh people were feeling the crisis with climate as they were receiving more refugees coming to their country. People are migrating because mainly, and then they were already suffering from the climate change themselves, that how they're under the water. They're like most of the time the people who have a little bit of like dry land, the people who do not have dry land, they are like more overloaded population. So they are like having a lot of trouble economically in their country. And then when they have more refugees, we saw other examples in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, with different type of crisis which is related to climate. And we always see like the Fridays campaign and how youths are trying to be engaged and in understanding it better. I feel like what is lacking here is a kind of like type of leadership. We need kind of mind map. We need a like kind of a mapping, like how we could use, if it is in US, if it is in another country, of your personal experiences and stories we hear, like where is that bridge? How can we support each other within our provinces or states of in a country locally or globally? Let's say there is a crisis in Pakistan and we are in US. How could we like reach out there? How could we make sure that we give fundings that are specifically going to the cause of climate, the people who are affected? How can we like have a transparent mechanism, a team of body, a plan, a group of people who could like really assist, and it could be like really be helpful and help them once they face it. Like now their house is broken, they have lost their lives. You mentioned about physically how they get more impacted more than the physical environment itself. That is important. They lose their families, their kids, and I feel like they are never being hurt. I feel like no one is there for them. There is just the headline news for 2 days and then it's gone. Like how can we make it, how can we become more united? How can we have like more mechanism? I would very highly appreciate. Sorry, I threw a lot of question and it was so brief. Sorry for that.
Well, I regret that I don't have any answers for that one. That's huge. And what I ended up doing is figuring out what can I do to make an impact. And so, that's how we ended up where we are in only 6 years. Because many of the environmentalists and the planners value this. They just aren't as informed about it, and what they want to be. And I didn't mention, I wish I had, so I'll do it now, is I want to influence the planners because they're in the position to make policy and influence policy basically. And so what I'm doing is taking for several years I went and took these workshops to the arts and culture people with the idea of leveling up that conversation, trying to get more people aware of it and to connect. But now we're focused on the planners. We're trying to take it to the planners. And so we submitted these workshops, because we also have a mental health workshop, to the American Planning Association for a continuing education. And so, there are a whole bunch of professions that have to take continuing education units to remain certified. And so this will be a way they're extra motivated to take these because they maintain their certification. So that's, in my small world, that's what I realized I could do. But how to help, like Bangladesh, they're practically the only place in the world that's losing as much land as Louisiana is. But all of the deltas of the world, all the large rivers, sea level is impacting them first. So yeah, no, I have the same questions about how, now the good news is that we are getting our message out more. In June, we're going to the Columbia Climate School's migration and relocation conference and sharing about our strategies. And then we responded to a UNESCO call for creative strategies. And so we're preparing an article for a publication by UNESCO. So, you just keep taking advantage of opportunities as you can. And that's one of the reasons I want to retire, so that I can retire from my state job, so that I can devote more energies to those things.
Thank you so much for answering.
Haseen, I feel like you've brought up two critical components of this. One is leadership, right? Who's taking a stand? Who's taking a lead? Clearly, governments are kind of come and go, right? Not all governments stick to their guns for as long as you'd like them to. So governments are not necessarily where leadership is, although it certainly could be there. But who are the organizations that are kind of flying below the radar of government that might be taking the lead or serving as leaders on this? But then the other point that I think Maida made is, what can we do locally? How can you begin to just sort of make a difference in my little neighborhood, and then maybe that will inspire somebody to make a difference in their little neighborhood, and so on. But yeah, Maida, I wondered if you could actually, did anybody else have a question? I don't want to jump in and steal a question slot. Anybody else? Jenny?
Jenny does, yeah.
I think it looks like Jenny does.
Sorry,
Yep.
I can't find my raise hand button. I apologize. So sorry. It's just the old school raise my hand. So firstly, thanks, Maida, for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I think, Amy, to your point, you just mentioned, I think what you're building down there in terms of in a lot of uncertainty, and the fact that government can change within 4 years, within six months of a new, there's a lot of change. I think building that grassroots community of what you're doing creates connection. It gives them actually collective agency to be able to work together. If you started with 50 and there's now 1,100, that's a substantial increase in terms of people that are moving in a similar direction, and then therefore have more power over what they're looking to do. I had a question around, obviously, and I'm one of the people in Tom's class at the moment. But one of the things we've been talking about is, mitigation, adaptation, and migration. And obviously this was focused on migration, but you mentioned the other two. And I have a question, a little bit about, what do you think of those strategies is the most effective when you're looking at culture? Which one of those strategies kind of is easier to put culture maybe at the heart of what's happening? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. Now this is I'm kind of self-taught on some of these issues, but my understanding is that mitigation is about the science. That is carbon, carbon capture, and all the science of stopping the physical changes that are happening. Adaptation is how we respond to them and deal with what's actually happening. So that's a much smaller conversation worldwide, although it's growing, because more and more people are saying, hey, we may not be stopping this. And the scientists are even questioning how they're languaging, how they're communicating, because what they've been doing, just telling them facts, doesn't work either.
Mhm.
So within the adaptation conversation, that small, adaptation is like raising your house. In Louisiana, it's, storm surges. And what was really interesting, Ida, the one that happened a couple of years ago, the houses that had been raised for storm surges, well, Ida was a wind event, so those houses got destroyed, but the old houses that hadn't been raised did fine in a wind event. They didn't catch the wind. So adaptation includes all that kind of stuff. It's still, once you get into it, it's hard to segregate adaptation and mitigation when you get into the weeds. But yeah, the way I think of it is the culture is people, like mental health. You have basically, after the last storm, Ida, people were walking around like zombies for weeks, not just a day or two, for weeks. They were so traumatized by it. And this is nothing new worldwide. There have been even much worse, and just in the last few months, we've had much worse thing, where people have been horribly traumatized. So none of this is new. One of it is that we just know more about what is going on around the world, but it overwhelms even the biggest government in the country, in the world.
I have one other question, because you mentioned that I have an interest in language and words. I've got a background in branding and marketing and communication. And when you mentioned the word managed was a bit of a word that people didn't appreciate, which I can completely see, because it feels like, you don't have any agency. We're going to take care of this for you. You're not equipped to be able to do it. Just sit over here while we sort it out. Are there any other words that either you find have been really unhelpful, or words that have been very helpful when you've been having conversations?
Well, there's a whole section of our workshop where,
okay.
if you look at the workbook, you'll see a good portion of that. But off the top of my head, I'm trying to recall.
Resilient, such a word, right, Ada?
Yeah, good point.
Well, you said
Yes.
well-being resonated too.
Yeah. Well, in a positive way, but resilience in South Louisiana, especially Southeast Louisiana, which has where the high land loss is, people are sick and tired of being asked to be resilient, because what they hear is just suck it up and deal with it. You're on your own, which they really actually are. But so it's really not a good idea for people to go in and tell these people that are so traumatized that they need to be resilient.
Yeah, I've heard that about resilience too. It's like and yet I also know that communities who have asked to be resilient for generations also realize that in fact is a quality they can draw on, right? So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
But South Louisiana people are not from one of those cultures that have been so persecuted. And so for the environment to turn on them like this,
that's a good point.
That's not part of the culture where personally have to be so resilient.
Yeah. So I love, Maida, that you that the Bayou Culture Collaborative has kind of at its core that our job is just kind of to create this space, right? This space for community to happen. But I'm wondering if you have examples of things that actually have come out of that opportunity to, I mean, I've attended a number of those, and it's the range of experiences in the group is really fascinating. I'm wondering if you could share a couple of
Yeah, there are definitely some.
examples where unusual collaborations or unusual aha moments happen, you know?
Well, these are some of the big ones. At the very first gathering, they decided that they needed to create these working groups. We did not prompt that at all. And one of them, the Culture and Coastal Policy Group, decided we need a position statement. And so they spent 5 months writing a position statement, and it's online, and I should have put it in the presentation, but it's available. And a researcher who had been doing this for her whole career, she says, that's what I said 20 years ago, but yours is better written. Well, it helps to have 2 language people edit it, you know. I coordinated the writing of it. The other big thing was that at the second, the state resilience officer, who has just been on the job about 8 months, he showed up and said he wants to talk. And so that was the past administration. So he submitted his report just before that administration ended in January. And it's very clear that the BCC influenced the plan,
Nice.
the resilience plan. He identified migration as being one of the things that the state needed to address, and that the culture and well-being of the people to be addressed too. What we've also had is where agency staffers will contact us individually and ask us to respond to a plan. That's happened several times, and because they can say it in the agency and it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
But if constituents start saying things, then it's more likely to be heard. But now it's a situation where we're being asked to participate in work groups for the master plan that's in development. You know, it takes 6 years to develop a master plan. So we're how the agency people and most of the federal groups too is how they're seeing us fit into their plan is in what they call community engagement endeavors. And because arts and culture people know how to find people.
Yeah.
You know, when you ask a biologist to find people to give comment, they may or may not, they may know, like if they're in, you know, if they're involved with fish or whatever, you know, they may know some fishermen, but they don't focus on the community. So that's where we plug into their plans. It's really kind of
nice. So there's a question in the chat from Odessa. Does the Bayou Culture Collaborative work with young people or would be open to sharing their stories with young people from other states who are visiting the area?
Okay, now you're getting to capacity.
Yeah.
And we are facing a fiscal cliff of our own and having to trim back some of our efforts. And we don't know how the grants are going to come in the future. This is a very flat, lean organization. And so there are some kind of things that are just such as that are just really beyond the capacity of this handful of people producing it. That our priority is the gatherings and the working groups. And what else we do depends on funding. So there is no full-time, you know, staff.
Yeah.
There is no staff. There are people who are working on this, like myself, in their paid position, but I don't work for. I'm not paid by the Bayou Culture Club.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, maybe there's at least an opportunity for a presentation or something like this that if you want to put your email address in the chat, Maida, maybe Odessa can reach out to you and at least just chat about ideas.
And what I'm doing nowadays is giving out my personal email because June 1st, I don't have access to any of the history, the years and years of emails that I had at the agency. So that all ends in one day.
Maida, the working groups are open to anyone who would like to participate and join, right?
Yeah.
And I see there seems to be great potential, as I mentioned, for, other parts of the country benefiting from the way that you're thinking, the way that you're organized, how it's really self-organized in a very powerful way. That could be a capacity issue, though, for these working groups. If you're, the people you want hearing this are, maybe at the state level, policymakers, agency people, and so forth, right?
Well, as an organization, our state is our priority, quite honestly.
Yeah.
But my priority is getting culture into planning.
Yeah.
So I'm going to New York to speak at the Columbia Climate School at my own expense. Because I feel like that's important.
When are you doing that?
Let's see. I think it's the 16th through the 18th, the Columbia Climate School. It is the place for climate adaptation.
Yeah.
16th to the 18th of what? April?
Oh, June. Sorry.
Of June. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me that is one of the big challenges, isn't it? I mean, trying to give a voice for culture to a community who has, no sort of professional experience with that. So breaking down the silos, what you've already done with these monthly meetings and with the working groups is create a discourse across these professional sectors that seems to me as a model for what needs to be done elsewhere, right? To be able to look at the working group on French language, as a kind of a cultural phenomenon to, show why that's important to scientists and engineers and policymakers. Same with folk arts.
Yeah.
I had a question I wanted to ask about the receiving communities. And maybe this goes back to what Nancy was talking about with the threats to infrastructure coming from the federal level. Well, there's just this national political culture that is so anti-immigrant, anti-outsider, and I'm wondering how that sort of affects negatively.
I think that attitude is pretty prevalent regardless, separate from what the federal government is doing. Terrebonne is a small city on the coast, and in the other parts of the rural parish surrounding it, the Bayou people are moving into Houma. So moving 10 miles, and the newspaper reported on the conflicts of these outsiders moving into suburban neighborhoods. Now, personally, I have a feeling, I don't know this for a fact, but I would bet money that it had to do with how rural people use front yards and how suburban people use front yards. Don't you just know that there were trucks and crab traps stacked in the front and boats on the lawn? Yeah, so that's 10 miles.
Yeah.
That's not far.
It's amazing.
People like their community, get very protective about their community, and that's heightened in this environment when they think all these outsiders are going to come and take over there. I was asked to speak to the Appalachian funders network. So they were a multi-state, they were all kinds of funders, foundations, cities, you know, all kinds of fund. And I talked about fear of the outsider, and they all started offering. That's exactly how we feel. We're scared y'all are going to come up and ruin our community.
Right.
And that's funders.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, I'm mindful of our time. Tom, were you going to have another question, or what were you?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask to kind of follow up on that question. And when you talked about being proactive, is that the same thing, would you say, as, you know, what people do when they talk about preparedness? Or is there, okay, so.
No, there's definitely, and I'm a bit of a prepper. I'm more of a Girl Scout, Boy Scout prepper.
Yeah.
Than the end of the world as we know it prepper. And you better be in Louisiana. You better have a backup source of electricity. No, what I'm talking about being proactive is having the arts and culture organizations offer programs to help the newcomers get to know the long-term residents. And actually,
So
Amy
it's
Stillman's work, I cite art of community in my workshops as one of the major ways to find out how to do this.
Yeah, we came down and did a workshop there years ago, I think.
Yeah, well, that was when I was working specifically with immigrants.
Yeah.
But
oh, that's right. Yeah.
The same strategies can apply to migrants within the United States, whether or not they're,
yeah,
whatever reason, if it's climate or some other reason, where numbers are suddenly descending on a community, there are ways to help bridge those communities. And the immigration world, like Welcoming America, has fabulous resources and that help people see how they can do this and reduce the conflict.
Okay, good. All right. Any last thoughts or comments from anyone, or Maida? No, Nancy. Nancy has something.
I don't know if there's some way if there's a link for the Columbia conference that you're talking about that maybe.
Yes, there's absolutely. But if you Google MR 2025, MR 2025 Columbia Climate School. Should pop up. This is where all the planners go.
Because when I went on the Columbia Climate School website, there was nothing.
Well, I can get that to you. But if you MR, somebody.
Yeah, I'm gonna just.
So Taylor put something in events. Yeah, is that for that very thing, Taylor?
Yeah, that's
I think so. If it's the mobility,
cool.
adaptation, and well-being and changing climate on
That's
June
it.
16th.
That's it.
Yes.
That's where I'll be speaking in June.
Okay. Maybe I can get there.
Yeah, it's in New York.
Yeah,
June.
exactly.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Except
well, Maida, thank you so much for
going to Columbia these days is not easy.
Yeah, that's the thing.
That's true.
Okay. So I also wanted to mention, Maida had referenced that it was a 2023 Louisiana Statewide Resilience Annual Report, which is available to take a look. These are some of the people that are, hearing what's going on, in the dialogues and working groups with the Bayou Culture Collaborative. Maida, is there any update to that? You mentioned the, you know, the petition is on, where is
Position
that?
statement. The position
Is it
statement.
position statement?
Yeah, and just yesterday they migrated a lot of these pages. So I might need to do a follow-up.
Okay.
I
And-
also maintain a bibliography, a resource list of all these
Oh, yeah.
organizations, and there's a short version which is getting quite long, but there's an even longer one if you really want to dive into it. And this might be in the work.
Okay.
Some of these resources are in the work.
Okay. Good. Maida, it was great to see you. Thank you
Yes,
so
thank
much
you.
for talking to us and sharing some of your great work, and you know, wish you all the best and moving forward, and hope to continue collaborating.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Maida. We really appreciate you taking your
Thank you
time
for
to
everybody
be with us.
at Goucher for doing this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks for coming, Nancy. Good to see you, and thanks
Yeah.
to the rest of you for being here.
Morgan, happy to see that you're here. Hassan, it was nice to meet you too.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Thank you,
Yeah,
Sarah.
you too.
Good to see you,
Okay.
Amy.
Take care.
Yeah.
See you next month.
Okay, good. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.